All right, the first problem to solve. Let's calculate the average that's specified in the numbers stored in the input array. So given an array numbers of integers, how do you print its average? So here, again, in the lectures, we're going to focus on just printing out something to the console. But you should really also adapt that to if you simply want to return the value as a return value for the utility method. That's something we spoke about already, right? Okay, so how do we do that? Let me go over the solution together with you. It's pretty easy. You just have to know about variable scope in order to really do the accumulation. Let's do this one as a first example. And then we'll run some test cases as well. Okay, so we declared the sum variable outside the scope of the for loop, meaning that what's the corresponding scope for this particular variable? It's going to be basically going to be for the rest of the method, either for console application or for utility method, right? Because once you declare the sum over here, it can be used over here inside the loop for accumulation between the iteration. Also, you can, let's say, outside the loop, once you exit from the loop, you're actually going to do sum over here. So very quick check over here. What does it really mean when we exit from the loop? So that means I less than numbers.length will be false, meaning that I will be larger than or equal to numbers.length. And we explained that when I is equal to numbers.length, that will be the very first invalid index, for example, 4 over here in this particular array. In that case, sum would have accumulated all the values from each member of the array over here. So that's kind of the idea for the algorithm. All right. Let's now, we don't need to really, we can just give you some idea over here. So very simple trace table over here. We know that for the value of I, initially simply 0, that will work because we only use the I over here rather than I minus 1. So we are safe. We wouldn't get the array index out of bound exception. Okay. And what's going to be the value for I? In this case, we're going to be I is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3. And let's say we talk about this particular array, the numbers, right? Let's say 1, 2, 6, 8. Let's say that's the first example we talk about. So numbers.length will just be 4 in this case. So 0, 1, 2, 3 will be okay. And when we get to 4, it's actually the exit point, right? Just to remind you over here. And now for 0, 1, 2, 3, and what's going to happen for the sum, right? For the very first iteration, sum will be plus equal to itself plus numbers at position I. I will be 0, which means plus 1. So sum will become 1. What about for the second iteration? For the second iteration, sum plus equal itself, numbers at position I. I will be actually 1. 1 will be referring to 2 over here. So 2 accumulated into 1 will be 3. All right, you kind of get an idea. And then what about the third iteration? For the third iteration, we're going to accumulate it by I will be equal to 2, which is referring to 6 over here. 6 plus 3 will be 9, right? And then finally, we're going to get the fourth iteration, numbers at position 3, which is referring to 8 over here. And then 8 plus 9 will be 17. So this will be the final sum when we get to this point, when we exit from the loop. We only accumulated 4 times. And then numbers.length will just be 4 in this case, right? And then you're going to get whatever value it should be. I believe that should be 4.25. I believe that will be the value, right? You can check. Okay, so that will be the average. All right, one thing that's kind of subtle, but you should know, in order to really get the division by with precision, you have to cast one of the integer operands into double. Otherwise, you would just get quotients, right? Okay, let's now have one more question for you. Okay, if you go back to the slides, it will show you that it will show you one question here. What will be the printout when the array is simply just empty? So let's say here, let's say the numbers, the way we initialize it is by simply initializing it with no elements stored inside, meaning that numbers.length will just be 0. Let's try this, okay? It's also very important for you to see how exactly this kind of input will run. So let's try this input over here. Okay, numbers will just be input array. Okay, so let's now use the pink over here. Okay, so we'll still initialize sum to be 0. However, when we check the state condition over here, which is very important, when we check it, so now I will be 0. And then less than, what's numbers.length? numbers that length will just be 0. 0 less than 0 is going to be false, which means we're going to bypass. For this particular input, for the bypass, we're not going to run even a single iteration. And then we're going to do this division over here. Average is going to be equal to, so sum will be still remain to be 0. It's never accumulated, like in the previous case over here. Okay, so it's going to be 0, 0.0, right, after the cast. 0.0 divided by, and then what about numbers that length? Well, since we talk about empty array, right, by 0 still, so this is going to give you division by 0 error. Division by 0. Division by 0 exception or error. It's going to be an error at runtime. Okay, so what should be the potential fix? I would say you can either, to make a conditional, you can say I can check to see if maybe numbers dot length is larger than 0. In that case, I will do this entire for loop, right? Make a conditional. Otherwise, I can actually do some error message over here. So that'll be one way to fix it. Or you can simply assume that the user will always pass and input numbers whose size is actually strictly larger than 0. It depends how you were given the problem. So either one. All right. So that's the first problem here. Okay, let's go on to the second problem. All right. The second one is about conditional printing. Let's say this is a problem. Given an integer array, we got different numbers over here. Some numbers are positive and some numbers are negative, for example here. How do you print out positive numbers only? You want to somehow get a subarray, maybe, if you want to solve as a utility method problem. But let's say we want to print out to the console. But you can think about alternatively how you can simply return a subarray that will contain only the positive numbers. That's another problem you can try to solve. All right, how do we do that? Well, this one will be very easy. You just have to somehow introduce some compound loop, which means inside the body of the loop, you want to put some if statement to say if the current number is positive, I'm going to print it out. Otherwise, I'm going to ignore that. Let's see exactly how we solve this problem here. It's pretty easy. So very standard initialization, state condition, and also increment. Okay. And the only thing that's you want to watch out for is you can inside the loop you can put an if conditional. If the current element we are looking at AI is strictly larger than 0, then we will print it out. Otherwise, we do nothing, right? We talk about the simplest if statement you can write without the else part, meaning that if the branching condition is false, we're gonna do nothing. Let's predict what's gonna happen here by using the trace table. I will be initially 0, and then what will be a length? Of course, let's use one example to predict. Let's say this particular array, let's say array A over here. And what's the size of the array? Apparently, it's a maximum value for the index plus 1. So a length would just be 6, meaning that we're going to guess I will be 0 for the first iteration. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? And what's going to happen is from 0 to 5, so these are the 6 iterations where the state condition will just be true. Whereas over here, for at the end of the 6th iteration, right, you can think about at the end of the 6th iteration, we're going to increment i's value to 6. That will give us false. So that means the time to exit from the loop. And each one of them is going to simply get AI. So AI, so it will be 2, followed by 1, followed by 3, followed by 4, followed by -4, followed by 10. So these are the numbers that we'll actually see, in each iteration. But now we're going to check to see whether it's going to be strictly larger than 0. Are they? Okay. You can see apparently this is, which means we're going to print it out. Print out 2. Remember, yeah, we're going to print out 2, exactly 2. And then this is larger than 0, so also true, we're going to print out, right? I'm basically talking about checking this condition here. If it is satisfied, we're going to print out AI. And also 3 here, also true. Oh, actually, I wrote something wrong over here. For the second iteration, it should be 1. And then third iteration should be 3. 4, also larger than 0. What about minus 4? It will be actually false, which means we bypass. You can think about it's really going to the else part without doing anything. And then what about 10 over here is going to be also true, right? So that means we're also going to print out 10. So in total, we print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers, except for this one. It's not really being printed out, right? That's conditional printing. All right, so hopefully this is a very simple one, but again, I think it's really important for you to really know how to argue about the correctness of your code. So you want to see exactly how many iterations you got, and when the state condition will get to false, meaning that we're going to exit from the loop, and then what's going to happen for each iteration, right? I'm just trying to trace it in a way that can really, from the bird eyes view, to see exactly how the loop will behave. All right, that's the second problem we have just solved. Let's now see the third problem, okay? So the third problem over here is about printing comma-separated lists. This is a very common problem that you have to solve, especially you want to prettify the output. Either you want to prettify the output to the console, or you may want to prettify the return string value from your utility method, either way. Okay, given an array names, that's the name of the array, of strings, how do you print its content separated by commas and ended with a period, right? So there are two delimiters we want to worry about. One is a comma, the other one is a period. For example, let's say array of size 3, we got Alan, Mark, and Tom. We want to print out this string over here, names, colon, actually forgot to call it, but anyway, name, colon, and then Alan followed by comma, Mark followed by comma, and then Tom followed by period. Basically, all the names should be separated by commas. If you got n names, you should get n minus 1 commas, because you got 3 names, so you got 2 commas, right? And then you always got just one single colon. Also, you only got one single period at the end. Okay, how do we solve this? I think you will need a little bit unique compound loop in a similar nature as the conditional printing we just talked about, right? But now you want to be sure about when to really print a comma after the current name, because in the very first iteration we're going to print out Alan, and the second iteration Mark, and the third iteration Tom over here. But now only in the first and also second iteration we actually need to put a comma followed by a space. But for the very last iteration, we don't need to print out any comma, right? That's the trick. So you want to somehow use the loop counter to tell you where you are in the list. Okay, so that's the insight into the problem. I want to describe to you verbally first. Let's now see the solution over here, and let's now also go over the solution to make sure you really understand what's going on. It's a very fundamental problem to solve, right? It's just slightly more complicated than the conditional printing we just spoke about, slightly, not too much. Let's see what we're going to do. Before the loop, we'll simply try to print out system, too thick, print line, names and colon. So to the console, we'll simply say names and then colon, right? So far. And then we got a standard initial value for the loop counter, and also we got the standard state condition, and also I++. So that means in this particular case, what will be the length for the array? It's going to be 3. The maximum index is simply just 2. So that means the length will be 3. Meaning that for I value, we're going to get 0 for the first iteration, 1, and then 2. And when we get to 3, it will be time to exit from the loop, right? It's very standard. But I just want to keep repeating to really make sure you really understand by your heart. All right, so now, so for the state condition here, we know that for the very first checks is going to be true. So that's why we're going to get exactly 3 iterations for these 3 names. And also, eventually, at the end of the third iteration, we're going to get false over here, right? That means time to exit from the loop, right? That's easy. And for the names, I'll get to the comma in just a moment. For the names, we know that I is going to be 0, 1, and 2. So names and position I is going to be Alan for the very first iteration at index 0. Second iteration, index 1, it will be Mark. And for the third iteration, index 2, it will be Tom. All right, so far so good. And we know, as I described to you, the idea would be only every name except for the very last one should really be followed by a comma, right? Only Alan and also Mark should really be followed by a comma, not for Tom. Tom has a very special place, this loop counter over here. So what exactly is this loop counter over here? You can think about this is the largest valid index. Largest valid index. And then in this case, it's simply just 2. But what would that be in general? The largest valid index in general would simply just be the names dot length. This will be the size of the array and then -1, right? Okay, so it's a very important insight, guys. I think once you understand about this particular insight over here, you will understand why we actually put this particular conditional over here. What we are saying over here is, we are saying that if the current loop counter is strictly less than the largest index, right? So now what we are saying is current index not yet reaching the largest index. So we haven't reached there yet. So this, if for the first iteration we are here, not yet. For the second iteration we are here, not yet. But once we get to the size -1, that means we have reached there. In that case, we don't need to print any comma. Right? Hopefully you see that. And don't get me wrong. So this solution over here, since we say names.length, so that means this solution here is very general. Depending on how large the names.length would be, so it's going to just work, right? If you got an array of 100 elements inside, so that means names.length would be 100 -1 would be 99, right? Okay, good. All right, let's see this. Well, we want to show you one more thing is, you can see this particular Boolean condition, pretty much like a conditional printing. Syntactically, that's the same structure, right? Let's now try to see what this condition will be, right? Names.length -1. So this is basically names.length, in this case is 3 -1 will be 2. This still have we reached there. So for the very first iteration, 0 is strictly less than 2, so that will be true. If it is true, that means we're going to print out basically the name, the current name, and also followed by comma space. So that means for the first iteration, we're going to say Alan followed by comma followed by space. What about the second iteration? The second iteration is going to be 1. So now for the second iteration, we are still going to print out Mark. Right? It's going to be Mark, and also 1 strictly less than 2. So that will be true. So followed by comma followed by space. What about the third iteration? For the third iteration, it's going to be 2. So now 2 strictly less than 2 is false. That means we have reached there. If this is false, doesn't mean we're going to exit from the loop. That simply means we don't put any comma after this, because we know this currently is now the very last iteration we're going to have. And then, so that means after this, we're simply just going to print out just Tom without anything else, right? You can think about in the third iteration, this part over here is going to be bypassed. We don't put any comma followed by space. All right, and then once we reach 3, we're going to see false for the when we evaluate the state condition over here. So that means we're going to exit from the loop. Once we exit from the loop, we're going to put also a single period at the end after Tom over here. All right, so that's how you do the comma separated list. Hopefully you see. And of course, the most important point for you to see is how we came up with this particular Boolean condition. Why do we say names.length -1? As I explained to you, names.length -1 denotes the last valid index over here. We want to make sure, except for this index over here, all the previous one should be followed by a comma, not the last one. All right, so that's the intuition you want to get. All right, let's now get to the next problem.